Have you ever wondered if we're living at the end of an era? Every great empire in history, from Rome to Britain, believed it was eternal, that it would be the one to break the cycle. They saw themselves as the exception, the permanent fixture on the world stage. But history has a funny way of repeating itself, following predictable patterns of rise and fall. For the better part of a century, the United States wasn't just another country, it was the world's operating system. The US dollar was the bedrock of global finance. The American military was the ultimate guarantor of security. Hollywood and pop culture set the global trends. When Washington spoke, the world listened. It was the final authority, the indispensable nation. But cracks are starting to show. Things that once seemed unthinkable are now daily headlines. History doesn't stop, and it certainly doesn't ask for permission. It moves in cycles, and the patterns that signaled the decline of past empires are reappearing today, right here in the United States. Think about it: soaring national debt, deep political division, social fragmentation, and a loss of faith in institutions. These aren't just random problems, they are classic symptoms. They are the same red flags that waved over Rome before its fall, over Spain before its empire crumbled, and over Britain as its global influence faded. We're seeing a society stretched to its limits, struggling under the weight of its own success and complexity. This isn't about being pessimistic or trying to spread fear. It's about recognizing the patterns, about seeing the writing on the wall. When a system becomes too complex and overextended, it becomes fragile. A single shock, or a series of smaller ones, can be enough to trigger a rapid, cascading collapse. We're witnessing the final stage that every great power eventually reaches, the point where decline accelerates and becomes irreversible. This isn't a prophecy, it's an observation based on historical precedent. We are living through a pivotal moment in history. The question is no longer if the old order will end, but what will come next. This is how the end begins. Have you ever noticed how every great story of collapse starts right at the very peak? It's a pattern that repeats throughout history, a cautionary tale for any power that feels invincible. Think about it. After World War II, America was on top of the world. Its homeland was untouched, its industries were booming, and its influence was unmatched. The American dollar became the global standard. Allies looked to Washington for leadership, and a wave of prosperity washed over the nation. This unprecedented growth created a powerful sense of confidence, and why wouldn't it? When everything is going your way, it's easy to believe it will last forever. But confidence can be a double-edged sword. It can slowly curdle into complacency. At the very peak of success, the feeling of permanence is intoxicating. Warnings from the sidelines sound like unnecessary pessimism. You start to believe you're the exception to the rule. But history is filled with empires that learned this lesson the hard way. The Roman Empire expanded so rapidly that its own bureaucracy couldn't keep up. It became too vast to govern effectively, planting the seeds of its own decline. The British Empire, which once boasted that the sun never set on it, eventually found itself with trade routes so extensive it could no longer afford to protect them. The Soviet Union tried to match American military power, a race it could never win economically, leading to its eventual implosion. For America, the true peak arguably came after the Cold War. The Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union dissolved, and it seemed like the American model had triumphed. There was a widespread belief, a kind of collective exhale, that history itself had reached its final chapter. We won. The thinking went. It's over. But here's the thing about history. It never truly ends. It doesn't just stop. It waits. It watches. It's a continuous unfolding story. The moment you believe you've reached the final page is often the exact moment a new, unexpected chapter is about to begin. The illusion of an end of history is perhaps the most dangerous form of complacency, because it blinds you to the new challenges already gathering on the horizon. The very success that defined the peak creates the conditions for the next great test, and that's a lesson worth remembering. Have you ever wondered why great empires fall? It's a question that has puzzled historians for centuries. Was it war, famine, or disease? While those things play a part, the real answer might be something far quieter, something that happens from the inside out. It's the moment when systems begin to replace accountability. Think about the rise of America. As the nation grew, so did its institutions. We built agencies, created regulations, and established vast bureaucracies. We designed endless processes, all with the goal of creating order and fairness. But an unintended consequence started to unfold. power began to shift. It moved away from individual people and drifted toward abstract procedures. Decisions that once required courage and conviction now got lost in a maze of paperwork and protocol. Responsibility became so diluted, so spread out across departments and committees, that no single person was ever truly accountable for the outcome. This isn't a new story. It's a pattern repeated throughout history. Look at ancient Rome. In its final centuries, the empire buried its once decisive leadership under layers and layers of administration. The ability to act was paralyzed by the need to follow procedure. The British Empire, at its peak, tried to govern a quarter of the world from distant desks in London, creating a disconnect that ultimately led to its unraveling. The Soviet Union took it a step further, replacing competence entirely with loyalty to the system, a fatal flaw that guaranteed its collapse. And now, America seems to be walking down a similar path, quietly and almost without notice. As our institutions have grown stronger and more complex, public trust has grown weaker. We see it every day. We feel that disconnect, that sense that the systems designed to serve us are now just serving themselves. It's a slow erosion, but it's relentless. And here's the most critical part. Once that fundamental trust breaks, no system, no matter how perfectly designed, can ever repair it. The fall doesn't begin with a bang. It begins with the shuffle of papers in an office where no one is responsible. Have you ever wondered what truly causes an empire to fall? It's a question that has haunted historians and leaders for centuries. Is it a massive invasion, a catastrophic natural disaster? The truth is far more subtle, and it starts with something we use every single day: money. Empires don't collapse because they suddenly run out of money. They collapse when money itself loses all meaning. Think about it. This isn't a new story. It's a pattern repeated throughout history, and we might be seeing it unfold again right now. Look at the United States. It hasn't run out of wealth, not by a long shot, but the nature of that wealth has been twisted and distorted. We've entered an era where debt has replaced real production, financial wizardry has pushed aside genuine industry, and rampant speculation has taken the place of creating actual value. We're not building things like we used to. We're trading complex financial instruments that few people truly understand. The numbers on the screen have become detached from the real world. This isn't a uniquely American problem either. It's a classic symptom of an empire in its later stages. Ancient Rome, at the height of its power, started debasing its currency. They would mix cheaper metals into their gold and silver coins to stretch their budget. At first, nobody noticed, but over time, the coins became worthless, and trust in the entire economic system evaporated. People lost faith in the very money they were holding. Sound familiar? Then there's the British Empire. To maintain its global prestige in vast territories, it borrowed staggering amounts of money, especially after the World Wars. The cost of policing the world became unsustainable. They were projecting an image of strength, while their economic foundation was cracking under the strain of immense debt. The Soviet Union had a different, but related, problem. It tried to hide its economic decay behind fabricated statistics and 5-year plans that looked great on paper but meant nothing in reality. They claimed massive production outputs while citizens stood in long lines for basic necessities. The numbers were lies, and eventually, the system couldn't support the weight of its own deception. Now, let's bring it back to the present day. America has taken a different route. It monetized its debt and, more importantly, it normalized it. We talk about trillions of dollars so casually now. These numbers are so massive, so abstract, that they've lost their weight. They don't feel real. When a government can simply create trillions of dollars out of thin air, what does that say about the value of each dollar you earn and save? For decades, the consequences of this debt have been postponed. We've kicked the can down the road, telling ourselves that we'll deal with it later. But what happens when later becomes the official policy? What happens when postponement is the only strategy left? This constant delay creates a fragile system, one that's perpetually on the brink, even if it looks stable on the surface. This economic shift leads to a second, equally dangerous symptom, a change in the empire's mindset. Every great power eventually reaches a point where peace starts to feel dangerous and instability feels like the new normal. For the United States, this is manifested as a state of permanent defense. Think about the endless deployments of troops around the globe, the vast network of military bases in dozens of countries, the continuous, low-grade conflicts that never seem to end. Wars are no longer declared, fought, and won. They are managed. They become a perpetual state of being, a constant line item in the national budget. Again, history shows us the way. Rome stretched its legions thin, trying to defend thousands of miles of borders against constant threats. Eventually, the empire was defending everywhere and secure nowhere. The British Navy was tasked with policing all the world's oceans, an endless and exhausting task that drained its resources and its will. The USSR was so obsessed with achieving military parity with the US that it bankrupted itself in a relentless arms race, neglecting the needs of its own people. When military spending consistently outweighs investment in infrastructure, education, and public well-being, it's a sign that priorities have become dangerously skewed. Force begins to replace diplomacy, not because it's more effective, but because it's the only tool left in the toolbox. The hammer sees every problem as a nail. So, here's the crucial takeaway. Empires don't fall because they lose a single, decisive war. They fall when the very idea of war becomes normalized, a permanent fixture of society. They rot from the inside out when their money becomes meaningless and their purpose becomes nothing more than maintaining a costly and exhausting status quo. By understanding these patterns, we're not just studying history, we're holding up a mirror to our own time. The signs are there, if we're willing to look. The question is, what will we do about it? What truly holds an empire together? It's not just armies or wealth, it's belief, a shared belief in fairness, in opportunity, and most importantly, in a shared future. But what happens when that belief shatters? History shows us that when belief fractures, the collapse isn't just possible, it accelerates. Look at the patterns. America today is struggling with the loss of narrative unity. The common ground is shrinking. Polarization has replaced consensus. Identity politics often overshadows citizenship. And in our digital age, raw information, often conflicting and unverified, has replaced the pursuit of shared truth. This isn't a new story. It's a very old one with different characters. Ancient Rome, at its peak, tried to maintain stability by censoring dissent. It worked, for a while. The British Empire, faced with growing calls for change, largely ignored the need for fundamental reform until it was too late. And the Soviet Union, it didn't fall because of an external invasion. It collapsed from within, the moment the official state truth lost its grip and people stopped pretending to believe it. The real crisis wasn't a lack of resources. It was the escape of truth from its cage. So when we look at the intense disagreements in America today, we need to ask a deeper question. Is the real crisis the disagreement itself? Or is it something more fundamental? Is it a crisis of disbelief? When a significant portion of the population stops believing in the system, in its institutions, its promises, its very legitimacy, they stop participating in its defense. They no longer see it as our system. They might comply, but they won't sacrifice. They might go along with the rules, but they won't fight to uphold them. History is ruthless on this point. No empire, no republic, no great power has ever survived that moment. The moment when the governed withdraw their consent, not with riots in the streets, but with a quiet, collective turning away. A quiet disbelief that the game is still worth playing. If this historical pattern is becoming clearer to you, consider subscribing. This channel isn't here to predict the end of the world. We're here to understand the timeless dynamics of power and why history, time and time again, seems to follow the same path. Thanks for watching. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that feels more relevant than ever, the fall of empires. We often imagine empires collapsing in a blaze of glory, invading armies, epic battles, cities burning, but history tells a very different, and frankly, a much quieter story. Empires don't shatter from the outside. They don't get conquered into oblivion. They crack from within. It starts subtly. Regions begin to disagree on fundamental issues. Institutions that once held everything together start to conflict with one another. Most importantly, different groups of people stop seeing themselves as part of the same whole. They lose that sense of shared identity, that feeling of being one people with a common destiny. Look at the Roman Empire. It didn't just vanish overnight. It fractured. It split into the Eastern and Western Roman empires, two entities that grew further and further apart until they were essentially different civilizations. Think about the British Empire. It wasn't defeated in a single, decisive war. Instead, its colonies, one by one, decided they no longer saw themselves as British subjects. They wanted their own identities, their own futures. The empire dissolved as its various parts simply broke away. Or consider the Soviet Union, a modern superpower. Its end wasn't a dramatic military defeat. It was an internal implosion. The USSR dissolved into 15 separate republics because the people of Lithuania, Ukraine, Georgia, and others no longer saw themselves as Soviet citizens. They were Lithuanians, Ukrainians, and Georgians first. The central bond had dissolved. Now, let's turn our gaze to the present. When we look at a country like the United States, the divisions are stark, but they aren't geographic, not yet. Anyway, there's no clear east-west or north-south split, like in ancient Rome or the American Civil War. The fractures today are psychological, they are ideological, they are cultural. We are divided by what we believe, who we trust, and how we see the world. We consume different news, live in different digital worlds, and increasingly, we see fellow citizens, not as neighbors with different opinions, but as adversaries. History shows us a clear pattern here. This kind of fragmentation always precedes decline. It's the canary in the coal mine. When the internal cohesion of a great power begins to unravel, the structure itself is at risk. And what's the final stage? It's not the chaos and violence we see in movies. It's something much more insidious. Fatigue, sheer, collective exhaustion. The system just gets tired. Public budgets become strained to the breaking point. There's no money left for ambitious projects, for maintaining infrastructure, or even for basic services. Political will evaporates. Trust in institutions, the government, the media, the courts erodes, until there's almost nothing left. Leadership becomes paralyzed, unable to make bold decisions or unite the population. The debates become circular and toxic, and nothing meaningful gets done. And what do the people do? They disengage. They stop believing in the system. They stop participating. They turn inward, focusing only on their own families and local communities, because the larger national project no longer feels like it belongs to them. It no longer feels worth the effort. This is how it ends. Rome didn't scream as it fell. It faded. It became so decentralized and weak that it slowly slipped into irrelevance. Barbarian kings didn't so much conquer Rome as they just walked in and took over a system that was already hollow. Britain didn't fight to the last man to hold its empire. It withdrew, quietly managing a long, slow decline from global hegemon to a regional power. The Soviet Union, for all its nuclear weapons and military might, dissolved without a fight. The will to hold it together was gone. Empires don't fall screaming, they fall tired. They die with a whimper, not a bang. It's a sobering lesson from history, and one that reminds us that the greatest strength of any nation is its internal unity and its shared sense of purpose. Once that is lost, the foundation begins to crumble. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're re-diving into a topic that's been on a lot of minds lately, the state of America. Is it collapsing? Is it the end of an era? Let's get one thing straight, right from the start. America has not collapsed. You can look around, life goes on. The system, for the most part, is still functioning. But, and this is a big but, it has entered a stage that every great power, every empire throughout history, has feared the most. This is the stage where decline isn't just a bad year or a political setback. It's when the problems become structural. Think of it like a grand old building. For years, maybe you could get by with a fresh coat of paint or fixing a leaky pipe. But now, the very foundations are cracked. The internal framework is weakening. Patching things up on the surface just doesn't work anymore. The problems are now part of the system itself. This doesn't mean the building is going to fall down tomorrow, or even next year. The Roman Empire, for example, experienced a very long, slow decline. Its structural issues were present for decades, even centuries, before the final fall. So, when we talk about structural decline for America, we're not predicting an apocalypse. We're pointing out that the era of easy fixes and kicking the can down the road is over. Real, fundamental change is no longer a choice. It's a necessity. History has this incredible way of being the ultimate judge. It doesn't really punish nations for their pride or their mistakes. Instead, it simply exposes them. It peels back the layers of rhetoric and self-belief and shows the reality underneath. And one lesson history teaches us, again and again, is that it has never, not once, spared an empire that believed it was permanent, that thought it was the exception to the rule. Believing you're invincible is often the first sign that you're not. This is when thrones fall. Now, this discussion naturally leads to a huge question. What happens next? What does it actually look like when an empire moves past this stage of structural decline? In our next video, we're going to explore exactly that. We'll look at what happens after a great power reaches this final, critical phase. and why the aftermath is almost never what people expect it to be. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe so you catch the next part of this series. See you then.